In my speech last week, I said that America would have to undergo an austerity program. But since this revolutionary new approach welcomes inflation, our economy will be free to grow, and we can spend. I believe the watchwords for the 80s should be, let's party. And in that spirit, I'd like to say, live from New York, it's Saturday night.
Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we're talking about the early years of SNL, Season 4, Episode 4, with host Steve Martin and musical guest Van Morrison. This show originally aired on November 4th, 1978. Brad, Steve Martin's back.
The man is back. He's here to save the season.
Here to save the season. It definitely needs saving, I think. It's his 6th appearance overall.
Yes.
There's not much to say about Steve Martin at this time. His newest album is just released, I think.
It's a bit recently released. He mentions in the monologue he's about to go. I mean, he's been on tour, but he says he's going on tour to promote the new album, which is huge, as we know.
It's one of my first comedy albums I ever got.
Yeah?
Yeah. Thanks, Columbia House.
Very much helped by the recording of King Tut to close out that album after his appearance last time on the show. Yeah, I mean, it's just Steve still being Steve, being the biggest name. And I guess that's an interesting question, though.
That's funny. I was going to call you on that.
You were going to call me on it?
Well, because you had just recently said that John Belushi's the biggest name in comedy.
Yeah. I guess movie star.
Yeah, I guess.
I guess that then there's two different worlds because Steve is yet to get into movies. Right. John just did. But Steve is hands down the biggest stand-up draw in the country.
Oh, yeah. And John did open for Steve. It's not like Steve opened for John.
That's true. Oh, that's true. Very good call. Good call.
Yeah.
How funny would it have been if, like, you ever hear those stories of the opening act gets bigger than the headliner, and by the end of the tour, they flip-flop position?
Yes. Yeah.
That last show, like, Steve Martin, opening act for the Blues Brothers.
That would be hilarious. Yeah, so Steve's back, 6th time, like we said. I mean, it's good to have him back because the show, the hosts so far have been odd. I mean, Fred Willard is a comedian, but Zappa and the Rolling Stones, not comedians at all.
No. And it's an interesting and I think good spot for him to come back. You know, he was the season 3 premiere host. He's going to be the season 5 premiere host. Season 4, they go with the Rolling Stones. And so I think you want to let that dust settle a little bit before you bring Steve back. Like, you don't want him doing episode 2. And so you get that kind of, like you just said, run of 3, odd or different Stones, Fred Willard, Zappa, Halloween, take the break off. And then you come back after the off week and you got Steve Martin. It's a good way to kind of get into this second run of shows.
Yeah. And it kind of gives you a chance to right the ship, as it were, right? You have Steve Martin this week. Next week, you have Buck Henry. He's a known quantity. Then you go to Carrie Fisher. Like, it just kind of starts to even back out to, I think, what we saw historically in the first 3 years, the stronger shows with the stronger hosts.
When you start to look at it and you're like, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
You're not gimmicky.
Right.
You're like, okay, great. You got solid host, good musical guest, obviously. It's a fun little run that we're getting into. Hopefully.
Hopefully. We'll find out. Well, there's not much more we can say about Steve Martin. Should we just get into it?
Well, we should say, last time we talked, I had questions.
Yes.
About Mr. Bill, and we had asked Walter. And so I got to say, we sent Walter an email, and he's like, just give me a call. So I talked to Walter Williams recently. Anybody who doesn't remember? Humble brag. The creator of Mr. Bill. And so I had some questions about Mr. Bill and just season 4 in general. And it was a great conversation. Walt had some really cool stories about some stuff about this episode, episode 1 with the Rolling Stones, some Fred Willard stuff. So we recorded it. And so we'll throw it on the end, right? At the end, after we do best bits, just keep listening and you can hear this. It's like a 15-minute conversation Walt and I had, but it was pretty fun.
Yeah, it's a nice conversation. He was so nice to give you his time and to talk to you and answer your questions. So it was fun. It's fun to listen to.
I was like, I have a quick question. He's like, I don't want to write. Just call me. I was like, okay, nice. Sure.
Is that all I have to do?
Yeah.
Well, let's get into our show then. The cold open starts with, again, the unofficial seal of the President of the United States. I don't know why that bothers me so much, but it just does.
I did notice that.
Yeah. We get President Carter in the Oval Office talking to us about inflation. Talking to Americans about inflation. This was clearly, obviously, a big topic at the time. And he spins it so that inflation is good. Inflation
is our friend.
Exactly. He's like, we'll all be millionaires by the time. Yeah, this is Dan doing Carter. This was good. Just 2 camera. I think these work most of the time, and I thought this one worked.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, it is good, but I really like this.
Yeah.
And it might have been because I'm watching too much current SNL where the cold opens are just so bloated and unenjoyable. This was just great. It's Dan solo to camera.
Yeah.
Short, smart, to the point.
Yep.
Fairly certain it's Jim Downey writing because it's just that biting political satire. It's just really smart and funny. Dan's got some great lines where when he's criticizing the economy at one point, he says, our economic system is screwed, blued, and tattooed.
This was fun. This was a fun open. I was happy to see Dan.
Yeah. And not to say it as a knock, it feels like they took a step back with this sketch. Like something they would have done. I feel like we haven't seen something like this season yet.
Right.
Kind of just a smart, toned down, solo to camera, like not a big spectacle of a sketch, but it's just really good. It's like a rare instance of this season so far being smart and funny and not really leaning that far into like the broadness and appealing to the masses sort of thing. I mean, granted, it's Carter and it's one of the more famous impressions you have, but I think it's done so well with a credit to Dan.
Yeah. I thought it was great. It's a fun way to start the show. Mm-hmm. Then we get into it. Something different in this week's credits that we haven't seen so far. Van Morrison gets a photo.
Yeah, but then I realized I had that note, and then I also made a note. I guess it's not a really good comparison since 2 of the first 3 musical guests were also the hosts, so they had their pictures regardless.
Right. Now I know. But Devo didn't, so.
And as we said, Lauren had zero desire to have Devo on the show, so It's probably you could probably care less to give them a picture.
But I thought it was funny. It was like a canned photo. It wasn't one taken for the show. It wasn't a Edie Baskin photo.
Yeah, they're not doing the Edie Baskin bumpers, for musical guests.
And Steve came out and did his stand-up. He comes out in his, trademark white suit with a literal vice on his head, talking about a headache that he had. And he just does stand-up bits. Some of the bits that are on the album about smoking marijuana.
Yeah, he leans into the drugs a lot more than he has, I feel like, in the past. Which I didn't know if it was kind of a comment like on the show of the drug culture that is the show now.
Right.
But I don't know. For what reason, I was like noticeable that this was like the most drug heavy his monologues have been.
Yeah, I feel like he doesn't have a lot of drug bits in his stand-up sets.
Right.
This is one from his stand-up set, but yeah, it's an interesting one to pull. Mm-hmm. I always like the placebo bit, how he's taking this new drug called placebo. And then he brings Bill Murray on stage.
Yeah, I was excited for that. I was excited to have Bill come back on and do another monologue because that last monologue of Steve's is, again, like I've said, probably my favorite of all time.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
And this is fun. He has Bill doing tricks, and every time Bill does something or answers a question, he gives him a cracker.
Yeah.
Then he plays Mary Had a Little Lamb on the horns. This was fun. And it's great to see Bill as Bill because he can do these types of things, and it's funny to see him interact with Steve.
It's fun to see the two of them together.
Right.
Had they only done one movie together?
I feel like we talked about this. Maybe this was off air. We talked about this. They did Little Shop of Horrors.
Little Shop of Horrors, right? That's the only time they've been on a shared screen together, right?
I believe so. I think that's what we came up with last time we talked about it. That's a shame. I wonder why.
I know. It's amazing. That's the only time because you see them and they're so good together.
Yeah, they really are. I did like where Steve's like, if I'm going to need crackers throughout the whole show, this changes my financial position. We may or may not be back.
And Bill's got a great attitude when he walks off too. He's like, thanks, Steve. And he just kind of walks off as like highfalutin Bill Murray. Is pretty good.
And that takes us to commercial for Elvis Presley's coat.
There's Walter Williams.
Yeah, this is a bit written by Walter. He tells you all about this, how, this was one of the first things he got on as a writer for the show.
Yeah, I mean, listen at the end of the episode. I'll let Walter tell the story about how he wrote it and when he wrote it and all that kind of fun stuff. But it's good. This is a really good commercial pre-tape.
Yeah, it is fun. And it's so of the moment. Like you have to understand like what was going on in the context of the late 70s.
The Beatle mania, Beatle nostalgia happening, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Beatle nostalgia plus Elvis, passing away a year prior. And it's kind of perfect for the timing.
It's funny. And the joke being it's literally just Elvis Presley's coat on tour. There was a part that I thought was hilarious is there's all these different shots of the jacket on stage. And it's just music, Elvis music being played over the loudspeakers. And during I'm All Shook Up, the jacket kind of shimmied a little bit.
Yeah, it was funny.
They put a lei on him for like Blue Hawaii. It's the jacket he's wearing a lei.
It's so funny.
It's pretty good.
It was. I liked the interviews they had with the audience too, like getting sound bites from people. That was fun.
Well, it's like all those Broadway testimonials, like people walk out of Cats and it's just people. I loved it. It was fantastic. It blew me away. Yeah, it was very well done.
It was a lot of fun.
I like the tag at the end. The king may be dead, but the coat lives on.
Well, what also lives on is What If? So this is a sketch that we saw not last time Steve hosted, but
when he hosted.
When he hosted. He was the host for the first time we saw What If.
Yeah. I feel like we talked about it was supposed to be on somewhere and didn't make it to air one week.
That does sound familiar.
But we have only seen it once, and it was a Steve Martin episode, so you got to think he kind of likes this idea.
Well, I feel like the ideas that they talk about in these are so absurd. It's kind of...
It's right up his...
Yeah, it's in his wheelhouse, like you said.
Yeah.
He hosts it this time as Craig Blair.
Yeah. No Joan Cage.
That's right. This week, the panel is Lorraine and Garrett, and they're talking about what if Eleanor Roosevelt could fly? And we see in the dramatization, we see that Joan Cage couldn't do it because Jane is playing Eleanor Roosevelt and John is playing FDR. I thought they were both pretty good in this too, as FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt.
I guess. I thought the concept was funny.
Yeah.
And I did not think the dramatization, I didn't think it offered much.
No. I felt that way about the first What If, I think. What I liked about this actually was that John didn't overdo it with his FDR. He's obviously confined to a chair, so there's not much he can do, but he didn't go over the top with it, I didn't think.
No, he didn't. They were both good, and Garrett was good. He did an excellent job.
Yeah.
But this is surprising to see as the first sketch of the night.
I thought so too.
Because I thought this was a weak sketch. I thought it was a weak sketch. And to have this be the first sketch, especially once we see all the other things we're going to see throughout the night.
I totally agree. I was surprised that it was the first thing we saw. I was also impressed that they did Jane flying. So she's obviously on a green screen, but they did it all in black and white on live TV.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like an easy thing to pull off. Well, we get another recurring bit that happened only with Steve. We get Theodoric of York, medieval judge.
Judge.
There was not a big reaction to this. I thought there would be.
Yes. I was surprised when this sketch fades in, it does not get a reaction.
Until Gilda speaks up as Brunhilde, and she got a reaction from the audience.
Interesting, because I thought the first reaction that I noticed was John walking in.
John got a big reaction, yeah.
Which I didn't understand. No. This whole sketch is throwing us off now.
Well, yeah, we could talk about John's reactions in a minute. So this is, it's Theodoric of York, and he's doing, Steve is Theodoric, and he's the judge providing justice in medieval times. Lorraine is accused of consorting with the devil, so they put her in the trough of justice to see if she floats, because then she's a witch, and if she sinks, she's not. So she's thing straight out of Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Gilda's Brunhilde again.
Yeah.
I did not notice the reaction for her. I mean, it was fine, but I didn't notice it being a big thing.
Yeah, because that was when the audience actually responded. It was when
okay.
they call out Brunhilde. Yeah. Poor Lorraine gets dunked in that tank too. It's not like...
No. Well, and she apparently during dress rehearsal almost drowned because was like a gag of her going in and having to get pulled out, and something went wrong in dress and she like took in too much water or something, which I can't figure out how it or why it had to be that way. But she came back, 2 hours later and did the live show.
Huh.
But you're right. It's just getting in that trough and getting dunked in was a thing.
Yeah. And then Bill comes in with a live pig, which was loud. Like it was a loud little piglet.
I kind of zoned out during the Bill portion of this sketch. So you have to...
He got accused of stealing a pig, and then he had to take 10 paces on hot coals to see if he was innocent or guilty. And as they're walking over, you couldn't really hear it because I guess they lost him on the boom. But he's like, 10, 6 or 8 wouldn't be enough. Like, we can't figure that out. And then they put him up on the rack.
The rack was a good prop. I came back around at this point, and I said, oh, they're actually like hoisting him up on an actual rack, which we should say these Theodoric of York sketches, the sets are pretty intense. The first one was really nice. This one, you've got the Lorraine trough, now this huge rack that Bill gets put up on.
Yeah, they do a nice job. Yeah, the live pig really threw me for a second too, because at first I thought it was a fake pig, and then it was squealing, and Gilda eventually took it off stage. And then John comes on. He's committed adultery.
So John gets a huge applause.
Huge reaction, yeah.
And that threw me off. It wasn't like a particular thing reference to the sketch. It was literally John just being John, but we've already seen him.
I was going to say.
It was the first time we've seen him tonight. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, don't know why. And then Jane comes back on as Lorraine's mom.
This would have been my applause.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because she's coming back playing like the Lorraine mother character, which I thought was the best part of Theodoric of York the first time when she turns on him.
Right.
So I literally was like, Jane, yes, 4 exclamation points. I was so excited.
Yeah.
They told me my daughter was here. She was accused of consorting with the devil.
Congratulations. She was found innocent.
Oh, thank God. Where is she?
At the bottom of the trough of justice. You see, if the body is accepted by the water, that means she's not guilty.
She's dead.
Well, she must have drowned from being under the water.
You call this justice, an innocent girl dead?
Yeah. Hey, God's will.
Why don't you just admit it? You don't know what you're doing. And who are you to interpret God's will?
Yeah, by what right?
Well, the king. It's the law.
Well, the law is wrong. The law should be changed.
You know, there is a point in what she is saying there, I think.
Wait a minute. Perhaps she's right. Maybe the king doesn't have a monopoly on truth. Maybe every man should be judged by his peers. A jury of his peers. 6 good men. No, wait. 8 good men. No, 10 good men. No, that's not enough. Let's see. 18 good men. No, that's too many. Let's see. 11 good men. Wait. 13 good men. No, 11 or 13, it really doesn't matter. Okay. But every man should be tried by a jury of his peers and be equal before the law. And perhaps every man should be free from cruel and unusual punishment. Nah.
The best part of this little scene between Steve and Jane when he takes her over to the trough and it's, she's innocent, but she's dead, is the fact that the scene takes place in front of Bill on the rack. So Bill's like throwing inside comments like, yeah, what about that? And he just has these little bits in the background. Was the best part of this little sequence to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, he makes a good point.
I agree. Like him just throwing in little one-liners during the whole thing is great.
Yeah, and then it turns him into the Steve Martin. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Nah. So that felt a little bit rushed, I thought, at the end. But maybe it's just because this was a long sketch and they realized it was like, let's wrap it up, everybody.
I felt like it was a long sketch and it was a long little monologue at the end, too, for him. But it was fun. I enjoyed it mostly because of Bill, I think, and Jane. Bill and Jane made
this one. Yeah. I mean, Steve played the same role and he was good and it helped push everything along. But yeah, the bright spots were Bill and Jane. There's almost this entire episode, and I didn't realize it till just before we started to record, are recurring sketches. I think with the exception of the final sketch.
Yes.
Everything tonight is something we've seen before.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that either, but yes. I know, and we didn't have that, the last couple of weeks. This is our first recurring heavy episode,
or just noticeable, I guess, because the first one was. I mean, we did say the Stones was. You could see it because it was like, oh, they're doing the greatest hits, so people can see what they want to see. Right. But for some reason, this episode, it's very familiar. It's Steve, and it's a bunch of Steve characters, as we'll see again and again. Which again is just weird as to why none of them were the first sketch of the night. But anyway.
Well, what should not have been the first sketch of the night was Van Morrison. He comes on to sing Wavelength.
Yeah. Nice segue.
Which I believe is a new song. Just came out on his new album, right?
Yeah, he was on tour at the time promoting this album, Wavelength. It'd been out for a couple of months at this point. It was like he had taken like a 2 or 3 year break earlier in the 70s. And this is like the second album after that break.
Got it.
And this was the first single off that album that came out earlier that fall, I think, a couple months earlier.
Look, I'm not a huge Van Morrison fan.
You must not be. I can see you backpedaling already.
Well, the thing is, every Van Morrison song I know gets stuck in my head like an earworm, and I just can't get them out. So I don't want to listen to too much Van Morrison, but I enjoyed this. Like, I enjoy Van Morrison when I hear him. The backup singers struck me during this performance, though.
The two ladies?
Yeah, the two ladies. The one lady on the left in the purple was so into it and happy to be there and was on it. And the other lady looked like she had never performed before in her life. She looked very out of it and just confused, definitely following the other one's lead. It was distracting to me.
Well, I think this was a weird point. I was trying to look this up. I saw somewhere, and I couldn't really find if it was true or not, but I saw somewhere that Van Morrison had played a couple nights before, which he did. He actually played this really small club in New York called the Bottom Line, like 2 or 3 days earlier. It's actually a really great bootleg if you ever find it. But they said like he canceled the rest of his tour after this previous show. And I looked, it was online. I couldn't find anything, although I did see a bunch of dates listed after that with no set list on them. So I don't know. So I'm just like, maybe there's some band things happening, because I guess Van Morrison is also well known of being kind of a dick, I guess. Somewhat, at least older Van Morrison.
Maybe, yeah.
But
he went through a period apparently with a bunch of stage fright and didn't perform.
Oh, yeah.
And the band's concert, the farewell to the band concert that happened on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, last waltz.
When was that?
76.
Yeah.
He's awesome in
76. Yeah. Well, apparently that was like when he got back to performing live because he was friends with the band.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to go on stage for that. Like, he was off stage and was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this.
And then he steals the show. It's like one of my favorite performances of that entire concert is him doing Caravan.
Oh, really?
Oh my God, it's great. He's wearing this purple like body jumpsuit and he's doing head kicks into the air, like kicks with his foot up in the air and stuff. And they literally play him off. Like, he keeps like doing this like refrain over and over, and the band has to play him off. He's like, oh yeah. Van Morrison's Caravan from The Last Waltz is one of the greatest rock performances of all time. It's just so great.
I will check that out. I did not know that Van Morrison was knighted. Did you know that?
No, I thought you were going to say you didn't know he was in them. That he was in a band.
No, I knew that. Yeah, he's Sir Van Morrison now.
Good for
him.
As
of 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this. It's a decent song. It's very reminiscent of what I like about Van Morrison. Like, I really like late 60s, early 70s till around this point Van Morrison. And this is kind of where I stop digging his tunes. Like, I know this era of Van Morrison fairly well, and then I kind of just completely drop off. When he does like Tupelo Honey and plays with the band, and this album is probably like the last album I kind of know.
But you liked this performance?
I think so. I thought it was good. I mean, there is something about him as a performer. Like, he doesn't do it. He just stands there at the microphone and sings. But we've seen many a guy not pull that off. But there is something captivating about watching him as a performer. And the band's very good, and it's a really upbeat, fun song. Like, I thought everything about this worked.
His drummer looked captivated too. He just stares up at Van Morrison the whole time. It's adorable. Well, Weekend Update is next, and it starts with, Jane setting up that coming up on Weekend Update.
Yes.
There's something about an Asian flu shot.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's a photograph.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's, whatever. That was like, oh, this is where we're going. Then they come back and...
Well, we should say, it's like a famous photograph from the Vietnam War of a guy shooting a Vietnamese guy like at point blank range.
Correct.
Yes.
And then we get a joke that Weekend Update is brought to you by Colonel Lingus's fried chicken.
Colonel Lingus, here it is. Decades before it becomes an actual sketch.
This is the original Colonel Lingus.
Yeah, take that, kids.
Yeah. You thought that joke was original when Tina Fey wrote it? And then we get Weekend Update. Jane, this was interesting to me. Jane did one joke and then threw right to Bill.
Yes.
I just thought that was, usually we get a few jokes from Jane.
I feel like the reason being is that they took the week off to kind of transition Bill out of Stargazer Bill and be straight man Bill. And I think that maybe that's why I didn't notice the only one joke, but I did notice that it felt like Bill kind of dropped the celebrity Stargazer routine. And maybe that's why. Maybe they just gave her one to get to Bill right away. Because normally she was carrying the load on Update.
But then he does one joke, and granted, it's a long joke, but then goes right into his celebrity corner where he says he's going to talk to Diana Ross.
Okay. I was very worried when I heard this. Because my first question was, who's going to do blackface?
Oh,
and then I said, oh, wait. There's Garrett. And I don't know which is, well, I guess I do know which is worse. But I was just, that was my first worry as to what horrible road they were going to go down during this bit.
I had a similar thought. Yeah, for half a second, I was like, poor Garrett's going to end up doing this. And he did.
Yeah, I don't know why I went the other way first, but it took me a slight detour to get to Garrett. But yeah.
And so Bill comes on and he takes some shots at Harlem, talks to, interviews Diana Ross, but then has Garrett sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which I always enjoy Garrett singing. So that was nice. But yeah, poor Garrett. That's all I kept thinking throughout the whole thing.
Oh, hold on, because it's only going to get worse. This is not.
Yes, this is true. No, I know.
I can't even bring it up because I'm going to get really upset about it. Let's keep moving. Next, I can't talk about this now.
And then it stays with Bill, or maybe it goes back to. Anyway, Bill then does this joke about Iran and Stop the Shah, and he does this bit that does not age well.
Does not age well. My
fair to say.
Exact note I have as well. Does not age well.
Yeah.
That aside, I think Bill's pretty good in Weekend Update. And the people are really digging it. They're digging him on Update.
This was the only part where he kind of slipped into the
little bit
Stargazer Bill.
I agree.
Yeah.
A little bit. I had that.
Yeah. And then it comes back to Jane, and who's doing this whole bit on illiteracy. And it was very distracting because the audience is laughing. You can see that something's happening next to Jane off screen. There's you see some shadows and stuff.
It's like someone's getting into position for the next bit. Yeah.
And I knew exactly who it was the moment the crowd started reacting.
Yeah.
It was very distracting.
That aside, I don't know how well it worked. So I think this was an idea. It was like them trying something new.
Oh, right.
So it's Jane doing a commentary. And as she's giving this commentary about literacy, it's a Chiron scroll goes up. And that's what the joke is what they write on the screen. And I think it was interesting. It was like trying to do something different than a point counterpoint. It kind of felt like it took that spot. So I think it's just them trying something. It just didn't work out too well, of doing something different instead of doing a point counterpoint every single week.
And the joke was that it was all of this text on screen because it's about illiteracy. So illiterate people can't read what's being written by them. And then the last thing is kill the illiterates.
Right. So that, and coupled with what you were talking about the audience kind of being taken out of it by watching John, whether or not John was doing anything purposely or not, you can't tell, but there's definitely them reacting to stuff that's not Jane.
And John comes on as a political analyst this time.
John's first desk piece of the season.
Yeah, and he comes on to talk about the importance of voting. Election day is a few days after this episode airs. And he talks about why elections are important, because possession is just a misdemeanor as opposed to,
Again, leaning into drugs this episode. It's like, it's season 4 drug culture. You can't get away from it.
Write what you know, baby.
Yeah, that's true.
I thought his ramp up on this was more subtle than it generally is in these. Like, I thought this was better than usual.
Because I thought it ramped up a little quick.
Really?
It did. Like unnecessarily quick. But
well, the whole thing is unnecessary. Like the whole ramp up bit is unnecessary. But of all of John's rants, especially his desk rants, I think this was probably my favorite so far.
Wow.
As far as the whole Irish, love their mothers, that one's my favorite. But this one, as far as the pacing and how he ramped up, because he didn't go right to 13.
Well, there's nowhere to go. I did not like this one. I didn't hate it, but to me, it seemed phoned in to the point where, and I don't condone this joke or this bit, but there's always this thing with Jane where he like threatens to hit her. She like tries to stop. He's like, curtain, watch it, whatever. And again, I'm not condoning that he's going to like slap Jane, but I didn't even buy that. It felt like he was half-assing the whole thing. To your point of like maybe not being so ramped up so quick. Right. I mean, I do like that. That's what I like in the sketches. I like watching John get so over the top, and he just does. He doesn't get there in this, and because of that, I just didn't. It felt very middle of the road, and just very much like John just phoned it in. Different
strokes for different folks.
Yeah, man.
So just to circle back though, what you find funniest is that he's going to hit Jane, right?
Can I preface that a fourth time?
Oh, I'm going to cut all of that out and just drop in a yes after that question.
I'm watching. I'm like, this is not going to go over well, but I'm just trying to, how else could I? Yeah. Well, how great is Jane? Does that get me out of it?
How?
Does that help?
Yes. Maybe we should have renamed it the How Great is Jane Project.
We haven't made John Belushi t-shirts.
We haven't, but I have a feeling that you've made some on your own. You just wear when I'm not around. And that was it. That was our weekend update for this week. It was, again, short.
They are short. It's still
all
short.
Season
yeah.
long.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And multiple cameos or, correspondent pieces or whatever, as usual.
Yeah, it's short, and you had 3 bits, basically. Celebrity Corner, the commentary thing, and then John's piece. So, yeah, very short.
Yeah. Well, the next sketch is not short, and it's a recurring bit, and it's one that I was surprised was coming so late in the show.
How is this not your first sketch of the night?
Right? So we start off at a bar. John's there as a customer, Bill's there as the bartender, and the 3 women walk in to get drinks, and John tries to hit on them. They turn him down, and then in come the Festrunk brothers.
Hi, Ted! Get off my back!
Eat my dust.
How about it? Can I get you mad about something?
That's your problem. One is plenty.
How about a couple of brewskis, fellas?
Don't mention it.
Hey, Ted, I'm telling you something now. All night we have cruised the Fox bars, and yet no chicks would agree to swing with us.
They were frightened by our bulges.
You sure it was the bulges and not those hats?
Hats? We brought them with us.
And our toothbrushes.
Toothbrushes?
We have many toiletry articles in travel kits that we carry with us all the time.
You see, this prepares us for a night at any given Fox's Ted.
Well, I see you're fully equipped. There's 3 chicks right over there who seem to be available.
Foxes!
Bill is the setup man for everything. Bill
was very good.
It was fun to see Bill with these guys.
It was fun to see Bill. I was a little disappointed not to see Garrett, not to have them run.
Like Cliff wasn't with them. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a shame.
He probably was busy running out of one dress and getting in the other.
And then they try to hit on Gilda, Lorraine, and Jane by asking them very upfront about their sexual habits
and noises they may or may not make.
Yes. Yeah. This got a reaction from the crowd. Sure.
Of course it did. Again, why do you not lead
Yeah.
off? I get it.
Right.
But not sure how good it is.
I liked that they weren't in their apartment again.
Okay, sure.
You're kind of seeing them out in the wild this time, right? Like, I guess we saw them the very first time at the pool table.
So it's a little bit of a full circle thing.
I enjoyed them interacting with Bill. I thought the bit with the women was similar to the first one, but you know, it's just kind of, they took it all up a notch, really. I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
I thought this would have been a really easy first sketch of the night, though, to get the crowd
I agree.
into it.
Yeah, the crowd to get into it. There's nothing new in this. It's pretty much the same old lines, which is the point. And I think for some reason, because it's such a fun piece, or because just Steve and Dan are still so committed to these characters, you buy into it. I wasn't as upset that it was just another retread because they're so good and they're so into it.
So you didn't like this?
I didn't love it. And I didn't love it. This is like where you're like getting into minutia, but I didn't love it here. I think I would have enjoyed this sketch more if it was the first sketch of the night because of what you said, of like getting everybody into it. But we're past weekend update now. So now I want to see stuff. Like I want to get into it. I want to dig my teeth into stuff. This is something you put top of the batting order, leadoff hit, get guys on base before you start scoring.
Right.
But you put it down here, you're kind of like, it's like a waste, I feel like.
So far, the order of the show doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what happened from like dress to here and how stuff got shifted around.
Right.
I mean, let's just talk about the next sketch, because if you needed something to kick the episode off with, the next sketch is another good option.
Yeah, the next sketch, we get the return of the nerds. And it starts with Gilda in the hospital. And Garrett reprises his role as Grant Robinson Jr., which is still sounds to me like he's saying Brad Robinson when he says it. But
I did like that they referenced the science fair.
Yes.
That was a cool thing.
I enjoyed that because Garrett's character came back. Then Jane comes in as Lisa's mom. And then Steve comes back as Chaz the Spaz. Yeah, I liked that they called back to the science fair with, I mean, again, solid interaction, good interaction between Bill and Steve as Chaz.
Yeah, I was kind of bummed when Jane left because I think Jane's Mrs. Loopner just plays so well with other characters. So I was bummed when she just kind of came in and did like a quick thing and then left. I wanted to see more, and she will come back, which is good.
Right.
But yeah, again, I don't know. Before I get into it, okay. So I'm watching this sketch and I'm enjoying it, as everything you've said. It's fun. It's not great, but it's decent. I think considering what came out this episode, it's probably on the better end of the spectrum of sketches. Okay. I mean, they're playing to what the crowd wants.
Right.
The nerds and Mrs. Loopner. Steve comes in. He does Chaz the Spaz really well. It's just silly and stupid, which is, again, he's so good at. Jane comes back in. I'm like, all right, this is great. This is great. I'm enjoying it. And then Garrett comes back into the sketch again, dressed in drag as a nurse.
Yeah. So he plays Grant Robinson's mom, who works at the hospital.
I had to get unincensed for a minute to realize that's what was going on.
Yeah. Why we needed that, I don't know. It made no sense. Like there was nothing that happened.
Nothing
with her.
And if you needed a nurse, what is Lorraine doing?
I wrote that in my notes too. Why not Lorraine?
The Garrett thing was fun at the beginning of the sketch, right? Get him in. It's funny. It's another school friend. You referenced the last sketch. It's good. Let him leave. Why tying it into his mom who works there does nothing other than force Garrett to wear a dress.
Correct.
I can't express how pissed off I was when that happened.
I can see it just in your body language right now. You're still angry.
There's no reason. There was no reason to do it.
No, there was none.
I am pissed for two reasons. One, it made a fun sketch in my mind bad. I now dislike this sketch with just that quick turn. And that bothers me more than just Garrett in drag, whatever. We see it all the time. But like, why do you have him in the sketch and then do a quick change to come back in as a woman in drag? just made no sense at all.
And it didn't add anything to the
No,
sketch.
nothing.
Like, it added nothing except you got to see Garrett in drag, which maybe they thought that was funny.
Maybe.
And then he turns out the light and Gilda gets up and turns the light on. Like it was like I don't understand the last 3 minutes of that sketch.
Yeah, did I miss something about her getting the bear? Was there a point to that? He turns the light off and then she gets up, turns the light on, picks up a teddy bear, and then lays back down.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I didn't know if I missed again because I was so upset at this point that I'm like, maybe I missed a comment or a line somewhere of like what the bear was about.
I mean, the sketch could have ended when Mrs. Loopner leaves. Like we didn't need any of that, anything after that.
I'm trying to remember what happens when she comes back in. I got so upset on this.
Mrs. Loopner?
Yeah, she comes back in because everybody's in there. They're fighting, and it's like she stops the fight. Hello, Mrs. Loopner.
Exactly.
And then what happens?
And then Steve and Bill leave. And then
why do they leave?
Says, all right.
Does she kick him out? Oh, it's bedtime.
I don't think she really.
Oh, the nurse comes in.
Yeah, it's time.
That's why the nurse comes in. Like it's bedtime. Isn't that what happens? And they're like, it's like lights out. Visiting is over.
I think we were both so incensed by seeing Garrett dressed in drag.
So pissed. I was so pissed off.
I can tell. And I'm with you.
What's sad is it's not the Garrett of it that bothers me. It's the pointlessness of it all is what really bothers me about this.
Right.
When maybe it should be the Garrett, but oh my God.
Well, you know what bothered me was it dragged that sketch on for another, let's say 30 seconds at least, and cut into the next sketch, which I felt was short. It's very short.
The next sketch was very short.
So we get looks at books again.
This.
What do you mean?
Like another recurring.
Oh, yeah.
It's
a recurring.
This is the seventh time we've gotten looks at books.
Yeah.
This is our last one, too. I think this is our last looks at books.
I believe you're right. Yeah. Hosted by Jane again. And this time she's interviewing the author of a book called Mauled. And so Dan comes on with makeup on, prosthetics on to make it look like he was mauled by a bear. And he wrote a book about the dangers of feeding marshmallows to grizzly bears. And this is one that, like, I really enjoyed Dan in this. I really enjoyed Jane. I just thought it was way too short and it could have been more.
I mean, I literally have one note and it was, wow, that was short. Like it was over before you knew it.
I felt like there was so much there that there could have been there, I guess.
Well, I feel like this was like season 2 Dan at his finest. Like it's so bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
Like him with a mauled face as an author of this book. This is prime 10-1 season 2 Dan Aykroyd. Just like a bizarro sketch that he had a huge hand in writing. And it's so short. It is bizarrely short.
I like how he shows the example of don't feed bears like this, and he puts the marshmallow in his mouth. Again, like this is something that was funnier to me than that whole, 45 seconds at the end of the last sketch, that you could have given me more of this than Garrett and drag.
It's also bizarre. That sketch could have ended quicker. This sketch feels like it's shorter than it wanted to be. Like this got cut for time. And as we'll talk about, the final sketch gets run short. So by nerds, you have to know you're running into issues.
Yeah.
It's an odd way to go about things, technically speaking, to finish up the show.
Well, that's why, in my opinion, starting off the entire episode with what if, and maybe part of that was the green screen in black and white was like a technical thing that they needed to
set
do.
up and get it done and get it out of the way. Yep. Sure.
So maybe that's why that had to go first, but it just felt like a really bad spot for that sketch compared to the rest of the show. It's a shame. I enjoyed this looks at books. I enjoyed.
There could have been more. Yeah, there could have been a lot more here.
Yeah. And we roll into our next Van Morrison performance. He performs Kingdom Hall. I assume this is off of the same album.
Yep. This gets released as a single in the spring. It's like the third and final single from the album. Solid Van Morrison tune again.
Yes.
I'd say he's 2 for 2.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting that we've had 4 episodes now this season, 2 with musical guests and 2 with musical guests as the host. And the 2 musical guests that were just there to perform were far and away better than the two that were also hosts.
That's a good point. God, the Stones blew it. Zappa's its own thing, but no, that is a very interesting point. Yeah, the two "we're just here to play music" acts, really good.
I'm not a huge Van Morrison fan. You're not a huge Devo fan, and I think we both enjoyed those performances for what they were.
Oh yeah,
much more than the other two. So yeah. That rolls into our last sketch of the night, which takes place at a restaurant with Steve and Gilda, and Dan comes in as their waiter, and Dan starts, they're playing themselves, Steve and Gilda, and Dan as their waiter, does their lines to them, "Excuse me," and "Never mind" a couple of times as they're trying to have a serious conversation because Steve's girlfriend is terminal and Gilda's the only girl that she wouldn't mind Steve seeing while she's about to die. That's the sketch. And Dan keeps coming back and adding, trying to make them laugh
with their own SNL bits.
Right. Definitely a commentary on their newly found fame. But then this sketch gets cut short.
Yeah, I mean, this sketch just never gets to where it's going to be able to pay off because it just ends in the middle, which I believe was not planned. Like, I don't think this was like a planned, we're going to cut this in the middle as a joke kind of thing. So you never really kind of get the payoff for what the sketch wants to be. Because they just cut and go to commercial.
And then they come back for goodnights, and Steve references that there was a glitch, and so they weren't able to finish the sketch, but that they will resume it when he comes back in February.
Yeah, and they're still at the table. Like, they're still at the table on home base where the sketch took place, and now all the cast and Van Morrison are like surrounding them at the table.
But we don't know what the glitch was that they ran into.
No, and that's what it's like. It just seems very odd.
Yeah.
With the last kind of three pieces of the night, I mean, take away Nerd, the ending of the Nerd sketch, we can bitch about whatever, but like, Looks at Books was so short. I don't know. Do you just take looks at, if this was supposed to really be a longer sketch, just take Looks at Books out, run this till the end, and then Steve can't vamp if you're a minute short at Good Nights?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it was an odd way to go about it at 10-1 or 12:45, and Van Morrison's going on, or before Van goes on, I guess.
Right.
You'd think the writing's on the wall, but I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows why? I mean, it is kind of fun to show, the liveness of it. At least they're still showing the show's live. We don't know what could happen. Anything could happen, including something they've actually never done before. Is we stop a sketch in the middle of it.
Right.
So they're still leaning into the live aspect a little bit, which is still, for the lore of SNL and whatever.
Yeah. But that's it.
I like Lorraine's shirt at Good Night.
Oh, she's wearing a Blues Brothers shirt, right?
Blues Brothers shirt. Same shirt she's wearing in the picture she sent to us autographed. Friend of the pod, Lorraine Newman, just saying.
That's right.
Just throwing it out there.
Well, it was an interesting show, I think. It wasn't what you would expect a Steve show to be. I mean, we're also coming off the last time we saw Steve we can't compare it to that clearly.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed it for what it was. It didn't blow me away, but I didn't hate it. Much better than the last show.
Yeah. No, I had the same thing. I was like, man, I don't know what to say about this. I was feeling really good for like the first 15 minutes or so. Really liked the cold open. Really good monologue. And Walt's pre-tape, Elvis Presley's Coat, gets a really strong start. But then they make that choice of going with What If instead of Nerds or Festrunk.
Right.
And I think it just put the night on like a weird trajectory. Not bad. It's not bad sketches. Like, stuff was fun.
It was fun. Steve was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, going back into the recurring characters that he brings back, they're always fun.
It's such a different feel from the Frank Zappa show.
Oh,
where you could tell like
yes.
No one wanted to be there. No one wanted to be working with the host, to this episode where it was like, like Steve just folds in with everybody. Yeah. And like, you could just tell like everybody was having fun. And, you had a decent amount of like big sketches, like Theodoric of York had a lot of people in it. Nerds featured a bunch of people. Festrunks had a bunch of people. So you're getting sketches with a lot of the cast members in it, which was fun to see. The last half just got kind of weird for some reason.
It did. But I thought all in all, especially in the context of season 4, I think it was a strong show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Brad, what are your best bits?
I only have one.
Oh.
And I went with Elvis Presley's Coat.
Nice.
It felt like the only original thing of the night.
Okay.
Everything else felt, honestly, and maybe it was due to how those first 3 shows so far have gone.
Yeah.
It felt like they were trying to get themselves back where they wanted to be. So they were just giving the audience what they wanted to see. Here's a lot of things that are safe and we know should work with one of our safest hosts.
Right. Well, like we set up in the beginning, right? I feel like it was trying to right the ship a little bit.
You're right. Totally.
And I think they're definitely making that progress with this episode.
Yes.
I had 2 best bits and they were both purely based on performances.
Dan?
One was Theodoric of York.
Oh.
Because I thought Bill added so much to that. Like we've talked about Bill adding to sketches just with being Bill and just different ways he adds to it. And I thought he did that throughout that entire sketch, even when he wasn't the focus. And then my other best bit was looks at books. I thought Dan was great. I think it was way too short. I enjoyed that back and forth between Jane and Dan. Those were my 2 best bits.
I think if we got the looks at books that they wanted, then I would say yes. But it was too short for me to say it was a best bit. But I hear you.
No, I get it. Well, your best bit was Elvis Presley's coat. Let's hear what Walter Williams, the writer of Elvis Presley's coat, has to say about that and his time with the show.
Was there any announcement or did the audience know going into the beginning of the season, Mr. Bill was going to be a part of the show?
I don't think anybody ever knew Mr. Bill was going to be on any show because it was always originally the films were the little safety net. So if a sketch is running long or short, it was an easy thing to plug in. But if a sketch was running long, they would cut the film first, because it's easier to replay the film the next week rather than strike the sets, that. So,
right.
So I think it was part of it. It would always be on at the end because I would never know until the end whether it would be on or not. So, but yeah, that was, it was it went back the previous year. Actually went back 2 years. I think the second season. After that, I might have asked for just a little reimbursement of my expenses, which was like $75 or something or $100. Because at the time that was a big deal for me at scraping by. And they didn't talk to me for a year. So I didn't ask again. So I said, well, let me just make another one. And that was Mr. Bill Goes to the Circus, which was on the Michael Palin show in season 3. And somehow, a year later, after no contact, I can't remember if I got a call from Lorne or I tried to call Lorne or directly. I said, let me try, because I made the film. Either he put the circus film on first before the meeting or I met with him and then he put but then he did the circus film. And then the following week, he put another one I did, Mr. Bill Pays His Taxes, with the Christopher Lee show. And they made a big deal out of it. Yeah, they had Michael Palin actually introduce it. And here's something we don't have in Britain, the Mr. Bill. And it was really so I did meet with Lorne in the studio office. And he said that a friend of his son got in trouble at school for writing, "Here comes Mr. Bill's dog" on the bathroom wall. And Lorne realized, okay, this hit. this is working.
Okay.
And then he said, next year, I want you to make 10 Mr. Bill films. And I said, and you trust me to do that? And he said, no, but if it works, you'll be a hero and I'll be a hero. Okay. And we shook hands but then he said at the end, but that's if I come back next year. I said, well, why? Well, I'm in contract negotiations. And I'm like, oh, gee. I mean, he wasn't letting on whether he was coming back or not. So it was all then hinged on that. So I went back to New Orleans and recovered for a while after 2 years in New York of starvation and everything, and waited to see if Lorne was really going to come back. And he did. And then I went back and he told me to write the scripts, but he never actually read any of them. He just said, look, I'll see him in dress rehearsal. And, if I don't like him, then I just won't put him on. But he did put them all on. So, But in addition to that, when I got on that and I had a little office there and a little budget, I was able to buy a decent Super 8 camera. And I said, Lauren, I really have other things besides Mr. Bill. I mean, I have a comedy show, and I really write a lot of other things. So he invited me to write a commercial parody, because the commercial parodies were written before. It was the first thing before this season, because they needed some pre-production time and so forth. So they wrote those scripts first. So he invited me to submit, to write something. And I was there in the office, and I was hanging out in Franken and Davis's office. And I told Tom Davis about this idea I wanted to do for Elvis Presley's coat in concert, because of all Beatlemania was happening at the time and all. And Tom Davis, he thought it was really funny. It was a great idea. And then Lauren walked in, and then Tom said, hey, Walter's got a good idea. It's about Elvis's coat in concert. And Lauren says, he just totally shook his head no. So you ever see what a still object looks like on film? I didn't want to mention Mr. Bill, but so he just kind of said no and walked out. I mean, it was like the night before. But then Davis said, nah, go, just write it anyway, do it. So the next night I did write it. Lauren had a stack of scripts on his desk for the commercial parodies and stuff. He just took each one, read them to himself, and he'd make a comment. He'd take another one, read them to himself, make a comment. And he read one. He says, Elvis's coat of definite. He's like, what? And then later Davis says, you see how it works here? Like, and then later that night, went down the elevator. I was leaving, and Lauren was way up ahead, and he stopped. And I caught up with him, and he said, I've been talking to some executives here, and if you still want that writing job, I said, oh, yes. And he got in his limousine, and I went down the subway. I couldn't believe it. And so I had 2 jobs all of a sudden. So it was a staff writing position plus a contract to do 10 Mr. Bill films. And so that's all I did, night and day for that year or 2 years. Right?
But the audience, as an audience member, fan, no one knew Mr. Bill was going to be on that frequently, right? Like there was no announcement or anything, because that's what I was watching. It was so interesting. The first, again, 2 out of the first 3 episodes, you get the new Mr. Bills, which is really cool. That's what got me thinking. I was like, if you're watching it, are you expecting more and more? It's kind of cool. So
go ahead. No, it was actually based on responses and fan mail and stuff that I wasn't aware of. A lot of, they were getting a lot of statistics about Mr. Bill. And I'm sure that's why Lauren offered me to do 10, because it had built up, even the 2 or 3 I had done. And then with the Mr. Bill goes to the circus and then pays his taxes, it really took it into another. And so he was helping build it up. But no one knew. I didn't know. In fact, before the circus thing, I thought that was it. With Mr. Bill and Saturday Night Live after the second season, because they hadn't talked to me in like a year. So,
do you remember then when you knew it was a thing, like when it really started hitting? Was it during this 4th season when then you realized, like, okay, this is something, like the audience is really responding to it, and this is a really popular thing on the show?
Actually, it was that 3rd season when Lauren actually let me come to the show, and then Michael Palin introduced it and said Mr. Bill, and the crowd went wild.
That's when you knew. That's when you knew. Okay, there's something here. Okay, cool.
And it hadn't even been on in almost a year. But
right.
But maybe the fanfare with Michael Palin too is obviously my favorite. And but then and then suddenly 10, and I really had my work cut out. I made the first one was like a one-time thing. It's like a spoof on bad animation. You smash the thing up, it's broken, and and then on to the next movie, and then. And I really didn't want to, get pigeonholed with this, bad animation parody. But when you have an opportunity like that, and then I set out to give the whole season a story arc. Yeah. So now I knew I had some time to work with. I knew just doing the same thing repetitiously, and it would get tired. So I put him on a saga where he's trying to get away, and he's running away even by the end, trying to hitchhike to get away from Mr. Hands, who's realizing might not be his best friend. And but it's, you can't really escape him because it's this form, whatever. And then the 5th season, I had another 10 episodes, and that's where I got into more 16 millimeter and a little more sophisticated sets and stuff, which I think is good.
Oh yeah. So then they primarily kept them kind of as a back pocket sort of thing when they were running short on time or having issues with sketches. They knew they could throw.
Except one time, and that was the last show. I don't want to give it away to you guys since you're watching the 4th season, but the last show of the 4th season, the cold opening, Lauren, the week before says, I want you to do the cold opening for the last show. And then I did the Mr. Bill going to Saturday Night Live and smashing into the Rockefeller Center, NBC and all that. But that's the only one that I knew was going to be on. The last episode of right. Season 4. Yeah, right. That I knew.
That's the only one that was episode specific.
And it started. It could be on or not. Right. In fact, Mr. Bill Goes to New York was going to be on the first show. It was ready. But the Rolling Stones and everything, it was too much going on. So they postponed it to the second show.
As we saw Mr. Bill so frequently the first 3 episodes, and I was just wondering, knowing how big Mr. Bill becomes, in pop culture in the SNL world, I was like, did the audience know this? Like, because you're 3 weeks in, you've already seen 2. I mean, you've only seen like 2 or 3 in a whole season leading up to this. Right. And you've already like 2 for 3. You're like, oh, is this? And it was also, again, kind of, like I said, kind of odd. Not odd, but like Franken and Davis, they would announce a Franken and Davis show in the opening credits. Sure. They didn't do that for Mr. Bill, and they stopped introducing them. It's not a home movie. It's not a special thing. Right. So like with Gary Weiss, they'd say, hey, here's a film from Gary Weiss. Mr. Bill got nothing. So I was just trying to figure out how it, as an audience member, how it fit in and how you realized this was now like a part of the show, a bigger part of the show.
I think it all helped not knowing. Because it made them a mystery, wondering if it would be on the show, and they knew it would be on at the end. So it's kind of a good pull too, in a way, for people that let's see if it's going to be on. But so I think that mystery didn't hurt anything.
Sure,
it kind of made me a little freaked out. And I actually wrote a skit when I was on as a writer. So because exactly what you're talking about, I wrote a skit called Walter and Lauren. So it's supposed to happen during the show, and Lauren's at his booth or whatever. And I come up to him asking him, do you think Mr. Bill's going to be on tonight? Because my mom would like to see her. She's in intensive care. And they've had her like move her to the TV room, and they got to unplug it just a little while, just about, do you think it might be on? And I don't know, Walter. Check with me later. So I wrote it as like a little running thing that would work whether it was on or not. But at the read through on Wednesday, he got to Walter and Lauren, and he didn't do it. He said, we'll work on this upstairs. So he didn't accept it or didn't want to do it. But Fred Willard was the host of that show. And he said,
that was for Fred Willard? Wow.
Yeah. He said afterwards, man, that was hilarious. Why didn't y'all do that? I don't know. It was a little audacious of me, I guess. But it was that thing, like not knowing.
Yeah.
So I made a skit out of it.
Oh, that would have been so funny. I can't believe. Oh, that would have been great. Even to bring back like later in season 4 too, or something would have been great. That idea.
Right. Come each show, But she's hanging in there. Right.
Yeah.
But back then it really was like the biggest thing after the Beatles was Saturday Night, as far as a cultural, everybody was into it kind of thing. And there weren't a lot of those. Right?
I can't believe your first episode on the show proper was with the Stones. That had to be insane.
That's right. And I was in a skit with them too. Actually, they cut. It was Dave Mabel's ex-police.
Ex-police.
Working on their own.
Vigilantes.
And so I was one of Dave Mabel's policemen had a baton and the white helmet. And my job was to hold Keith Richards with the baton to his neck and he was smoking a cigarette, laughing his ass off.
There was an ex-police sketch for episode 1 with the Stones. I hadn't heard that.
It would have been great. It would have been great.
Oh my God. Because we talked about that episode, and we talked about, I know there was a sketch about like a backstage sketch with Bill playing Jerry Aldini and Paul doing Don Kirshner that I've seen pictures of. I guess it must have made it to dress rehearsal, but I had never heard about the ex-police sketch. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, with the Stones. And my job was holding the baton to Keith Richards' neck, and he was complimenting me on what a great job I did. Right?
Did it make it to dress or not even that far?
Oh yeah, we did a full thing in dress. Yeah, it was a full blown skit,
Wow. That's amazing. Anyway. Again, for your first episode, then to have been in a sketch with the Stones. Oh my goodness.
It's crazy. There's a picture. I mean, ever see that picture of I think I posted it on Twitter, and it's from Lorne is scolding Belushi, and the Stones are sitting around.
Yes, I know the picture you're talking about.
And
when you mentioned the scolding, I know now. I know what you're talking
Belushi
about. Yep.
was out all night with Keith Richards the night before, and then of the show, and I'd never slept. But if you look in the back of that picture, there's Don Pardo, and right behind it is me sitting there laughing.
Oh, I've got to find that again. I know what you're talking about now. Yep.
But I'm in the very back. The guy, I have a jacket on, but I can't believe I was there. And I think maybe Lauren had called me in to tell me that he was not going to show Elvis's coat. Actually, I guess I can quote him because he said that was the best commercial parody ever on the show when it came on. So, and that was all my family in it too. My Uncle Walt and all the people, the testimonials and all that. So anyway.
Awesome.
Okay, well, tell everybody hi that you talked to from back
I will.
in the day.
I will. Thanks so much. Yeah, and who knows? I mean, I'll bother you again in the future if I have any questions. But hey, thanks so much.
I'm
for
here.
talking to me.
I'm here. The mic works. All right. Take care, man.
All right. Well, take care, bud.
See you. Bye bye.
That was great. It was so nice of Walter Williams again to give you his time.
It was a lot of fun. It was great. And if you want to hear more, listen back to our season 2 episode, the Karen Black episode. Walter's with us for the whole episode, and he talks about the creation of Mr. Bill and how he got involved with Saturday Night Live, first doing the home movies and then becoming the staff writer for this season. So there's a lot of good stories Walter has in that episode too.
Yeah, it's great. That's a lot of fun. Next week, we'll be talking about the early years of SNL, Season 4, Episode 5, with host Buck Henry and musical guests, The Grateful Dead. That'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow. Thanks for listening to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please take a moment to rate and review the project wherever you find us. You can also drop us a line to let us know what you liked or didn't and what else you might like to hear in the future at nr4ptproject@gmail.com. And lastly, you can find us on social media everywhere at nr4ptproject. Thanks again for listening. Have a pleasant tomorrow.
No. Is it a prop? No. Did you bring props?
I don't bring props to an audio medium. You
don't bring props to an audio medium? Come on! It's commitment to the bit, my friend.